So, hello, Toronto commuters. Uh, this is going to be a video about the cycling situation in Toronto's political Ward 5, which used to be Wards 11 and 12. This is Ward 5. This is the boundaries. And so I'm going to just go through like why nobody bikes in Ward 5 now and why that's probably not going to change and why it might change in the future. And the short answer is you can't really get anywhere without having to traverse some kind of major infrastructure barrier like a rail line or a highway or some major road or something like that that has very few crossings. And so the issue is the crossings that allow you to get over those barriers. In places like this, closer to the downtown, cycling has been pretty easy before major infrastructure went in because there's this network of side streets. So cyclists could largely avoid the main roads, which were too sketchy and dangerous. So there's so many cyclists that it became politically possible to get better infrastructure put in. Our ward was always built uh, for just drivers, built in a way that forces everybody to drive or use transit. And the networks of side streets only go through these small areas. So you can go for a 5-minute bike ride, but then you end up running into the river or the rail line or something like that, having to turn back. So you can go for a bike ride, but you can't really go anywhere that you need to go. So the main roads are actually like necessary for cyclists to use, and we can't really use them because the drivers don't like it, and they can. I mean, the enforcement that would be required to get drivers to cooperate with cyclists being in these places is just way beyond what the police are like willing to do and are capable of doing, and it's not really a reasonable ask. And it's just crazy to try to mix like 60-kilometer-an-hour driving with 20-kilometer-an-hour cycling anyway. So the short version of the story is, in this ward, you need to be able to use the main roads, and there's no plan to make them cyclist accessible. A few of them might become cyclist accessible in the future, like Eglinton, which is supposed to get good cycling facilities with the Eglinton LRT, and Black Creek Drive, which may at some point get a good bike path, and it certainly can accommodate one. Although this like possible version of the future is like it's difficult to be in that space. There's in this area there's so many things that have supposed to happen that were supposed to happen, and the story keeps changing and they don't end up happening. And then things like the Scarlet Road bike lane did surprisingly go in, and it's great, but because it's not really complemented by a bunch of other stuff, its usefulness is kind of limited. So this is Scarlet. It's got really kick-ass cycle tracks. And this winter, unlike when this photo was taken, they were actually maintained. This is one big improvement that we've had. The city has like maintained the Scarlet Road cycle tracks all through the year in beautiful fashion. So it wasn't like this past winter. It was actually really good. Another big improvement that they made was on Runnymede under here, which is like a major point of entry for the ward. They put in these barriers, which made this actually really usable. Before it was just painted lines, and it was just so sketchy and scary and covered in debris all the time that lots of people just didn't use it, and it just wasn't popular. Then they put these in, and we still went through a whole winter where the the surface here was like covered in ice and snow, so it was still sketchy, and we were actually having to like use this part of the road, and it was even worse because it was hard to get back into the bike lane uh, once you got past the icy part. And then finally, this last winter, they kept it maintained pretty well all through the winter. There was a few days here and there where it was sketchy, but they actually did a good job of maintaining that. So these two things are kind of a beacon of hope that the city and the local councillor Francis Nunziata is are going to honor their commitments and take a reasonable approach to the situation. There's this little patch of Eglinton here, though, which represents kind of a concerning problem, which is we were supposed to get a bike path up this side of Eglinton that would connect the end of the Eglinton path here, right there, with like this spot up here, which would be good because it would make it relatively easy to get to here, which is one of the few places you can cross this rail line. And then you could get across here, which is just so crappy, but it's just like 5 minutes of terribleness. And then you can get through this neighborhood and blah, 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 and you can get onto the K. Gardner Beltline Trail. So that would seal up part of this route that goes across this whole area and be really useful. It would maintain a few rough patches, but this is one of the rough patches that was like kind of a deal breaker and really, really crappy for cyclists to have to deal with. So we were really excited about this, and then it didn't happen. And then it was supposed to happen, and then it didn't happen. And now finally they are digging this up for construction, but it's probably just for where the LRT is going to go through here, and there really is only enough space for the LRT. So it's going to end up being more difficult for cyclists because so far we've been able to, hoof it up and down this spot on the grass, which sucks, but it's better than like using the sidewalk. It's better than using Eglinton. And if they do just use all this space for the LRT, then they would have to use Eglinton itself for cycling space. And I mean, if they weren't willing to change it for the LRT itself, I kind of doubt that they're going to change it for cyclists. So I don't know what the plan is here. And every time we get told what the plan is here, it's so vague, and then it changes. So that's kind of, those different things, the Scarlet Road thing, the Runnymede thing, and this part of Eglinton represent this sort of encouraging and discouraging, aspects of the future of like all of the different things that I'm about to walk you through. And I'm about to walk you through all the different crossing points of all the different crazy infrastructure barriers that make it hard for cyclists to use this area. And the point is, they make it hard for drivers to switch to cycling, and they make it hard for transit users to switch to cycling. And I want to start off by pointing out why, it would be really attractive for people to switch to cycling. Say, let's just do a hypothetical trip. Driving this, it's a 10 or 15-minute drive. On transit, this is, over a half hour. And as a bike ride, it's like half the amount of time that it would be on transit. So that would totally, there's the potential for a whole bunch of transit users to switch over to cycling for this route. And maybe this route as well, 23 minutes on a bike. And that's 38 minutes to an hour, potentially. Yeah, 40 minutes. So it's like half the time on a bike. And on a bike, it only takes 5 minutes longer than driving it. Let's do another trip that's like longer and goes all the way through the ward. This is like a half-hour drive. This is like an hour-long bike ride. And it's about an hour-long transit trip. So to me, that has good potential for cycling. But the thing is, if you want to do this trip on a bicycle, you got to deal with, okay, Royal York, it has bike lanes. Yeah, they're full of debris. But, it's, if you got really good, high quality, expensive tires, you can kind of do it. And there's the Eglinton Path, which is awesome. Further up Eglinton here, it gets really good. I mean, if theoretically they maintained this in the winter, which you can see this winter they did, that's some great cycling. But then, of course, there's the spot we just reviewed, which currently is not going to happen. And in the future, might happen, but I don't really see how, given what they're doing with it right now. Like, I just don't get what their plan is for this. And, I will ask the councillor and the city and whatever, but so far the answers just keep changing all the time. And then, of course, there's spots like this. This is why nobody's doing it right now, because, no, you're not going to bike through this. I biked through this recently, and it was so sketchy. I came through, and this driver rushed me from behind to the point where I just jumped off the road and hung out on one of these medians waiting for him to pass. The guy stopped, and he seemed like either he was messing with me or he just, didn't realize how scary it was for somebody to be like suddenly tailgating you after coming up behind you at like 70. This is the exact spot. The guy stops right behind me and he's like, "Man, I'm so sorry. Go ahead. Get in front of me. It's fine. Get in front of me." And I was like, "No, dude, you just go for it. I'll just be slowing you down on this spot." And yeah, that's the truth. And before all the construction, it was terrible too. So nobody's going to bike through this spot. So this trip that totally could compete with transit users aren't going to switch to cycling to do this kind of thing, even though it's a totally great bike ride, except for the crazy driver behavior. And then you got to deal with all these weird spots like this where share this with drivers while you're cycling up here. It's pretty much doable. And then you can get onto the rail path, after going through 5 minutes of like hardcore awkwardness around a spot like here, where, I mean, this is a perfect example of a place where there's enough space to put in cycling facilities, but they must have these left turn lanes. As you can see, I mean, these look like pretty reasonable people. These don't look like crazy scofflaw, angry cyclists, but this is where they end up. Is this really what you want to be doing on your commute? Not so much, so hardly anybody does it. So this cycling trip that could totally work, yeah, it's not going to do it. I'll give you one more example before I get down to the meat and potatoes of this. Just a random cycling trip. Let's say from there to there. On a bike, 20 minutes, no problem. On transit, half an hour. It's kind of a pain. Driving, 12 minutes, so it doesn't even take that much longer to bike it than it does to drive it. But on a bike, there is no way to avoid using either. Let's see, you could do it in 24 minutes on this trip. And you absolutely must use Keel, right, where there's 5 lanes for drivers, almost a meter for pedestrians on either side, no space whatsoever for cyclists. And like I can say from experience, trying to bike on Keel is just crazy. And as you can see, nobody is trying it. It's not going to happen. So, I mean, like I said, this is an area where no matter what kind of bike commute you do, you have to use the main streets at some point, and the main streets are inhospitable. And I mean, there's these plans for the future. Trethewey might have a good cycling route. That would be awesome. Eglinton might have a good cycling route. That would be awesome. Black Creek Drive might get something good. That would be awesome. And then there's the major city routes. Lawrence might get fixed at some point. That would be super great. But we'll see. We might get a rail path extension through here. That would be super great. But I mean, let's take a look at the possibilities in this spot. Like, where are they going to put a bike path through here? Are they going to expropriate some driving lot space next to the bingo hall? Okay. Or in this industrial area? Or somehow run a bike path through there? Through here? And again, this is like more expropriation. I mean, I don't know. Like, is this really going to happen through here? I kind of doubt it. So I'm going to go through all these spots. And in this review, I'm going to do, red, green, and orange to represent places that are like impossible in a practical sense, kind of difficult but possible, and easy in terms of crossing spots of these infrastructure barriers. And then for stuff that might change in the future, maybe, but right now is totally terrible, I'm going to do another color like, I don't know, pink or purple or something like that. And I'm going to try and use these 3 maps to get an idea of, which of these places are going to be which color, whether they're going to be red or purple or pink or whatever. This is going to be a long video. I've been planning on making this for a while. I've been waiting for a time when I had the emotional fortitude and the energy and the willingness and everything to do this. And honestly, I'm never going to have all of those things. But today, I have the willingness, and thanks to my new computer, I finally have the technical capability to do this. So here goes. So this is the ward, and I'm going to go through the barriers. So I'm going to make a new layer here. This is in Google Maps Editor, and I found this to be a great tool for making and editing maps. I highly suggest using it. So here's a rail line. I'm just going to put this, line through here to indicate that as a barrier. All right, done. And let's say this is an expressway, so it's basically a barrier. Maybe at some point it'll have, cyclist access through part of it. Even then, it might not be easy to cross. So it's basically a barrier. And then, of course, the highway itself is a super barrier. Let's see, one of the ward boundaries occurs along another rail line. So that's a barrier. And one of the things that I'm not going to get into is all the major roads which are also barriers, but there are all these places where you can cross over them in a somewhat reasonable way, and I'm just not going to try and review all that stuff. It's too much. So I'm just going to stick with the major infrastructure barriers, like this other rail line on the southern boundary of the ward. Let's see. Oh yeah, and the river, as in the valley, on the western boundary of the ward. And there's a cycling trail that goes through it, but there's very few places to actually cross this. Oh my god, I screwed this up. It's in the wrong layer. I'm gonna have to redo it. This is I could go through all this as homework for this video and then present the video just as a map and go through the map with you, but I want to actually review each of these spots so that y'all can see what the situation is at each of these spots. And this is going to be a long video. It's really just for people who are really curious about this situation. I'm going to mark Eglinton Flats as another barrier because it basically is. So let's see. Just to make it easier to see, there we go. This is all the barriers you got to deal with, the major ones that keep people from commuting around the ward. So there's all these places where there's neighborhoods, there's businesses, there's stuff like that, and they're all destinations. And those are the places where you want to go from and go to and go to bed, get up and go to school, get up and go to work, grab some groceries on your way home, go to the park, whatever it is. And these are all the things that are forcing you to do that in a car or on transit. And now I'm going to go through all the spots where you should be able to get through no matter how you're getting around, but maybe you can't really do so. So let's see, with the highway, crossing point there, one on Wendell. Next one is over here on Jane. Keel. I mean, all these spots for drivers, because they're so far apart and because you have to use one of them, they become choke points. Because everybody has to drive to get through them because they're terrible for cycling, it generates so much driving traffic, and there's so many drivers that it sucks for drivers right now anyway. Cycling takes up so much less space that if we could switch a bunch of these drivers over to cycling, the space that it would take to put the cyclists in would end up working out because there'd be fewer drivers. There's one other thing I want to... Oh my god, you gotta sign up just to check out the map? Okay. I just wanted to demonstrate that our ward is the... Where is Toronto? Okay. Our ward is like one of the places where the Strava heat map goes kind of dead. And Strava it's mostly used by like cyclists who are not commuting, but I think it's useful for something like this because it represents places that are viable for cycling. As you can see, the downtown is totally hot. And then this is our ward here. Our ward is where everybody turns back. It's where the heat map goes dark. And it stays dark to the north and to the west. So our ward is like a barrier for getting out to these other places. And these other places are also really inhospitable for cyclists, for basically the same reasons as our ward is. So anyway. Now let's do some boring stuff. Very boring, very discouraging. A review of the different crossing points of this highway, because they're all terrible. So, let's review how terrible it is. Because, I mean, I don't know, people want to say like, oh, nobody wants to bike because it's so cold in the winter. Nobody wants to bike because we're too lazy. But this isn't an issue of winter or laziness. This is just an issue of like, you are not going to cycle here. The drivers are not going to cooperate. Why would they on a road like this? They've all been told, oh, the cyclists all have places to go ride their bikes. We've made all these trails and stuff like that. But they haven't actually had to plan a route on a bike. As a driver, you can be like, oh yeah, the cyclist can probably take some spot somewhere. But if you actually try to figure out a cycling route, you realize, no. The whole thing has been designed to force everybody to drive. So that's one red zone where the cycling's not going to happen. The councillor has made it really clear cycling is not possible on Weston because we need it so that the drivers can get onto the highway and can get to and from the highway and get through the ward. So there is no plan to make Weston more cycling accessible. So, that's too bad. There is this one spot here. Now, I haven't tried to get through here on my bike. I'm guessing it pretty much sucks. But just to be charitable and optimistic, let's color it in orange. Next spot to check out is Jane Street. I mean, Jane's going to be really important because the distance between here and the spot we just checked out is pretty far. So on Jane, yeah, this is the plan. You're supposed to walk your bike past this person who's walking their thing. This is what I call a pedestrian and cyclist punishment zone. This type of place sells cars. Of course, they got this null space in the middle where there's this lane that you can't use, but they're not going to make a bike lane. In the city's official materials, they list these wide curb lanes as a cycling facility because they've been made extra wide so that cyclists can get safely passed by drivers. Not legally passed, not really safely passed, but not hit either. And of course, the cyclists have to go in the spot where there's all the debris and all this kind of stuff. So they got to basically have mountain bikes. So they can't really go fast. So it's not really going to work for commuting, but that's the plan. Let's see, just to verify that there is no plan to do anything on Jane. See, that's Jane. What is that? Major corridor study? Huh. So in the future, this one spot on Jane might become civilized. Maybe. So I'll color that in. You know what, I'll just put it in black, as in it's a mystery. Who knows? No, maybe I'll put these spots in like, no, I'll just leave it black. Because you can't see the future, so we're in the dark. So the next spot to check out is Kiel. Kiel Street. This is great. My old computer, as soon as I started recording, it was like slow as hell. So it was just impossible to do this kind of stuff. Yeah, that's a no-fly zone for cyclists. Of course, we have 7 lanes for drivers. Tiny little spot for pedestrians. Very unwelcoming. And 7 lanes for drivers. I mean, it's hard to say that you're just trying to accommodate current demand when, like, the design ensures that you can't cross this place comfortably, safely, etc., without a car. The City of Toronto's official materials say every street is a cycling street. Their plan for the future says we need to stop forcing people to commute, to pollute in order to commute. Well, let's see what their official plan says. No, their official plan for Kiel is for it to stay exactly as it is forever. Oh, except maybe in the future, it might change. Studies planned in conjunction, something vague. So, label that in black, as in we're in the dark. So, in terms of going north and south through this area, there is one spot that kind of sucks, one spot that is really terrible. And you know what? I'll put this spot, yeah, one spot that's really, really terrible. And you know what? The other crossing point is the Humber Trail, which, like, I'm going to put that in orange because it's great for some commutes. Kind of annoying to get to, but it's good. In wintertime, it's not really good for commuting, so it's kind of half and half. So, sort of, just thinking about it makes me tired. So, on the west end of it, we got these two places that are kind of plausible for crossing. One place that's terrible, the other place is terrible right now, we don't know. So this whole zone going from here to here is just not happening for cyclists right now. Probably not happening for cyclists in the future, but we'll see. Okay, on to the next big barrier. Let's check out just outside the ward here on Wilson. Do they have a plan for the future? They have nope, no plan. So let's check out what it looks like right now. On Wilson. Yeah, again, 6 super wide lanes for drivers, which means cyclists are supposed to walk this. Supposed to walk, let's see, where's the nearest side street? Supposed to walk this half a kilometer stretch next to pedestrians on a sidewalk that like doesn't really have enough space for a cyclist walking with their bike to pass another cyclist walking with their bike or even a pedestrian. So, no. That's not happening. Let's go through the rest of the crossing spots. Highway's never going to happen. Lawrence, okay. Castlefield, okay. Eglinton, we'll check that out. This little crossing here. Rogers, all right. St. Clair. No, I thought there was some other, oh yeah. This spot, that's entertaining. Will you see that? I thought there was like one more place. Oh, there's Davenport. Oops. Am I recording this properly? Yeah. Cool. Let's see. Davenport, there's DuPont, and I think that's actually outside the ward. Yeah. At this point, we're like well outside the ward. But we'll check these spots out because, I don't know, it's still relevant to us here. So what did we check out so far? We checked out Wilson. Oh, there's Wilson. There's the tracks. Can't cross it on the highway. Is that a spot? No. All these places where they could have made pedestrian flyovers, they probably should have made pedestrian and cyclist flyovers, as in bridges, but, you know, everybody can just drive anyway. So Lawrence, that sucks. Let's see if there's any plan for Lawrence. Oh, Lawrence may at some point be studied. So who knows what's going to happen for that? Sucks right now. It may continue to be terrible forever. Let's check out Castlefield. Castlefield is a place where I have crossed over a whole bunch of times, and every time I do, it's like the part of the commute that I am not looking forward to. It really doesn't look so bad. Crossing the tracks itself is not so bad, but this whole stretch through here is just barely a thing. Once you get to this point, it just sucks, and it would be so easy to make it great because there's enough space for some cycling facilities, but it's not really happening. Maybe it'll happen. This whole area is crappy. Let's see if they have plans for the future on Castlefield. Well, I think that's Castlefield. Yeah, so at some point they might. No, it'll just be a quiet street route. Not really any cycling infrastructure, just a quiet street route, which it basically already is. So currently and forevermore, it's going to be, doable, but crappy. Certainly not for all ages and skill abilities, It's for like cyclists like me who are good and who have no other way to get through. As part of a daily commute, I would do this, but I'm glad that my daily commutes don't include any places that are like this right now. So that's what orange means for me. Let's see, on Eglinton, what do we have? Currently, like, every time I end up in this spot, I'm just like, no. It's always sketchy. There's always pedestrians on the sidewalk. I don't like cycling on the sidewalk anyway. I mean, here's the thing about the sidewalk cycling. The cyclists that we currently have in places like this are the people who are just barely willing to break the law. So the drivers see cyclists breaking the law and they're like, oh yeah, the cyclists are the type of people who want to break the law. And what they're not seeing is all the drivers who are only driving because they're not willing to break the law, which they'd have to do if they wanted to try their commutes on a bicycle. And they're not willing to bike through the places like this. So if you're not willing to use the sidewalk and you're not willing to bike with the drivers, you're just not going to be a cyclist. So the cyclists that we have right now in this area are non-representative of the cyclists that we could have. The drivers are representative of the cyclists that we could have. And the transit users are also representative of the cyclists that we could have. This is part of the political issue in this area is there's not currently enough cyclists for the councillor to be able to say, look, we've got so many cyclists, we got to protect them, which is what they've been able to do downtown. Downtown, what they've been able to do is say, look, our cyclists are being totally inconvenienced because they have to use side streets and there's all these places where it's unsafe to cross, but there's so many cyclists already because it's possible. You can do it without being totally crazy or a total scofflaw or whatever. So let's make it convenient for these cyclists and let's make it convenient for the drivers to share the road with them. In this ward, there's no cyclists. There's like a few. And the conversation has not evolved into like the cyclists of the future are the drivers and transit users of today, but that's the truth. I don't really know if our counselor believes that, I don't really know if she could convince the public of that. I don't really know if she's trying to. It's hard to tell. So Eglinton is supposed to get kick-ass bike lanes, but I don't know. So right now, this is awful, and it might remain awful forever. We'll see what happens with the Eglinton bike lanes. So for now, that's black. This spot, it's so weird. It's the type of place that you only discover if you're doing a Google Maps type, plan of getting through this area, and you really get lucky and happen to discover this spot. Like, I only discovered this because of Google Maps route suggestions. And it's the type of place that I don't mind going through, but yeah, it's tiny. You got to wait for whoever is in there to clear the area. One time when I was going through here, I had this kid like waving a huge toy water pistol in my face. It was really sketchy. So, I mean, it works. You're not getting run down by drivers, but, in the winter, the path through this park kind of sucks, but, it exists. So, give that an orange. Next spot to check out is the Rogers Road crossing. Rogers has bike lanes. I've used these bike lanes. They're pretty good. And the crossing under the rail line is one of the spots where they get kind of lame and kind of sketchy, and where I'm glad I have $70 road bike tires instead of $10 road bike tires, and where, it's pretty easy to get a flat. It kind of sucks in the winter, but hey, I'm glad it's there, right? Could be better, but I'm glad it's there. So it's orange. This spot. I've never checked out this next place, and at some point, I'm definitely going to go there because this is like a tourist spot. This is like, if you want to do a tour of weird city infrastructure, you can see the fear and paranoia and hatred built into this. Like, it's like they want to pretend to be looking out for pedestrians in this spot. Like, there's going to be all these terribly sketchy cyclists. So they put all these bars through here, but in the end, it's just like, okay, pedestrians are going to have to stand around and wait for each other to go through because only one person can get through at a time. And if you've got a bike, it's like kind of actually physically hard to walk it through here. And this little spot is like, I don't even know how long it takes to do this, but I'm going to say this is like a 5-minute time commitment to get through here. I mean, look at all the fencing spots where they really wanted to like cyclist proof this spot. Because you got to go through all these weird, I mean, that's, I'd say, more of a, infrastructural oddity than part of a daily commute. But I'll put it in orange because you're not going to get run over there. Like, the reality of being hazed by drivers in this area is, as long as they don't physically hit you with their cars, nothing is going to happen to them. They can do crazy, crazy, crazy stuff, give you a heart attack by like almost hitting you. Nothing is going to happen to them. They can always say like, oh, well, that cyclist came out of nowhere. If they do hit you, all they have to do is not be drunk, remain on the scene and cooperate with police, and tell the right story. Just say like, that cyclist swerved out of nowhere. you know, maybe you've got a camera on your bicycle. Maybe the camera survives a fatal collision. For the most part, when people get really badly hurt, they don't even remember a collision. And it's the drivers saying, oh, this crazy cyclist came out of nowhere, versus the cyclist saying, this crazy driver deliberately hit me. And I mean, even if drivers are found guilty of uh, striking a cyclist, they get a fine. They get like an $800 fine at the most, or something crazy like that. So this is why places like this, I'm marking this in red because this is like not a reasonable spot to do on a bicycle. Let's see if there's any plan to do anything. Nope. See, this is not even really in our ward. So whatever. I mean, they already did what they're going to do with this area. So I'm just going to mark this in red and say, this is always going to be terrible. So let's see. I think we're well outside the ward boundary at this point. Yeah. But anyway, I don't know. Davenport's pretty much the same as Rogers. It's got a bike lane. Bike lane sucks, but you know, pretty much works to get through there. And DuPont in this spot. I forget what that's like. I mean, I'm going to check it out just because all the crossings that are in our ward are so bad and so far apart that if somebody from our ward is going east, they might end up going all the way down to DuPont to do this. Okay, Wallace is great. DuPont, not so much. So yeah, it's going to stay orange forever. So now we're done with that rail line. So let's see what we got here. This rail line all through the northern segment of this ward, it's impassable. You just can't do it. So if you're going from this area to this area, like, I mean, I want to go to the Yorkdale Mall, and I live over here. It would be an easy bike ride if they would just fix Lawrence, but we'll see. So I'm going to drive it. So I'm going to be part of the traffic jam through Lawrence. And it's not really a traffic jam because there's so much space for drivers, so it's just going to be always a driving route. This spot, you got to be in great shape to go through, so that kind of sucks. Hopefully Eglinton gets fixed. But yeah, right now, this rail line, you know, it really makes you think twice about doing any kind of commute, east or west. So let's see what Black Creek Drive is like. There's like nowhere to cross it north of Wilson, except for at Shepherd. Let's see what it's like at Wilson. I'll just mark that as one of the places I want to check out. And then the next spot would be, like, obviously not the highway. So the next spot would be Jane. You know, that's going to be crabby. Maple Leaf Drive. I forget whether that's good. There's Queens. Lawrence. Trethewey. Eglinton. And yeah, that's it. I mean, I don't know. There's Black Creek Drive. So I've checked this out. I actually biked along Black Creek Drive during the, what did they call it? When they closed it so that cyclists and pedestrians could use it for exercise space during COVID-19. Practically nobody was there on a bicycle because you can't, it went from like Trethewey to Lawrence, and they didn't do anything on Trethewey or Lawrence to make it easy to get to Black Creek Drive from any of the side streets. So there was no easy way to bike to it. So pretty much nobody showed up. And I'm sure they won't do it again because, it's like this is the typical thing in Toronto. It's like we're not going to make it safe enough for it to become popular enough for us to warrant doing anything to make it safe enough for it to become popular. And that's cycling in Toronto. But that's like these days that's cycling in the in places like this. So let's see, the highway, crossing the highway on Wilson. I've done this before. I think I like blocked it out of my mind because it was just so crappy. I probably just took the sidewalk, which is like, it's just amazing how little sidewalk space they throw into a place like this, and how like there's no effort to make any cycling space, even though there's loads of opportunities, and they're like flaunting it. They're like, yeah, we're going to put in this whole lane where you're not allowed to drive in, and then 6 lanes for drivers. I mean, as you can see in this shot, there's not a hell of a lot of demand for driving space in this spot, but there you go. Let's see, are they ever planning on doing anything on Wilson? No. Oh, wait a minute. Let's see, Wilson there. It might at some point get a bike lane. I mean, wouldn't that be cool? Obviously, there's enough space. Obviously, they could do it right now. They could have done it any one of these years, but maybe in the future, we don't know. So let's check out Jane. Like, there is nothing between those 2 spots. So these 2 spots are pretty important places to be able to cross over because, I mean, people here have a good reason to want to do stuff here. Look, you can go to Winners. Check that out. I mean, the way that the highways and the roads are set up and stuff requires you to do a hell of a lot of driving just to get from here to here. But when you can't actually use those roads on a bike, it's an insanely ridiculous transit trip. It's like, oh my God. And this is definitely an act of like forcing everybody to drive. Like, you must drive in order to do that 5-minute trip to the beer store to get a 6-pack. This is something my neighbor was talking about. And he was like, man, I really admire you, for cycling. It's like, I'm so lazy, I do my 5-minute trip to the beer store in my car. And I'm like, well, yeah, because you have to go under that one spot on Jane. I don't want to do that on my bike. Of course you do when you're in your car. You're not going to do that on a bike. And he hadn't even thought about it like that. I think a lot of people don't think about it like that. That's one of the reasons that I make these kind of videos. So, I mean, there's loads of space for a bike lane here. I mean, need to do a little bit of expropriation. Of course, that can't happen. Let's see if the city thinks that can happen. There is a plan for maybe doing something here on Jane. Isn't that cool? Oh, but it doesn't go up to the spot in question. No, there's no plan. So the plan is maybe a quiet side street route to connect that up. So that would involve this crossing So this is always going to be terrible. But maybe this spot, and it's only a little bit further away. So, I mean, if Wilson gets fixed, and this spot here is great, then you only have to go around that whole area. Let's see how large that is. So if all goes well, there's going to be almost a 2-kilometer gap through here to go around to get around this spot. If all goes well, if they decide to finally do what they should have done initially on Wilson, and if their plans for this spot turn out to be great, let's see what is Church like right now for crossing. It's like, this is definitely going to be a orange/yellow, because drivers in places like this, sometimes they get kind of crazy, but not terribly crazy. You know, and there's enough space to cross. It's like if somebody's driving up on you super... Anyway, long story short, it's going to be a orange. And then there's Queens, which I think is pretty much the same. Yeah. It's like, not so bad. They could put bike lanes through here, but they wouldn't be wide enough to meet the city's requirements. And so, thus, you know, it's always going to kind of suck. You're always going to be like, wow, I wish I had better tires here. I've got good tires, but like I spent $70 on each one of those tires. So, whatever. And honestly, mountain bikes are not great for commuting. In this neighborhood, most of the cyclists are riding mountain bikes, and I can see why, because they're riding them on the very edge of the major roads, and that's super scary because the drivers are zooming past at 70 kph with like inches between you and them. And you need the crazy tires because the edge of the road is just so full of debris. So let's see. Lawrence. Unnecessarily inhospitable right now. There's so much space. They even have what kind of seems almost like a bike lane. Of course, it's not wide enough to label it as such. Next to this, like, criminally narrow sidewalk. Next to this, like, yeah, of course, we need left turn lanes all over the place because the 4 lanes aren't enough. We gotta have then we gotta have the super, super, super wide curb lanes so that we can pretend that that makes it safe for cyclists, but really, drivers just go super fast down the center of them. So, now was there a plan for Lawrence? There is kind of a plan for Lawrence. So, I mean, I wouldn't say it's a plan. It's more of a possibility. So let's say, you know, that probably will never be workable, but we'll see. Maybe by the time I finally get put in the hospital by some crazy driver and give up on cycling because I'm physically incapable of it and I'm a vegetable, maybe sometime after that they'll put in a bike lane there. So let's see, what was Trethewey gonna maybe? Yeah, Trethewey was maybe gonna get a bike lane. Now, I don't think this is approved. I think it's like, it might be the plan at some point. Let's check it out, what it's like right now. This whole zone here is one of the big reasons why this area is not popular among cyclists. The total anti-cycling zone. It's huge. It's hard to detour around it. And it's kind of a big middle finger to cyclists because there's loads of space. There's not that many drivers. And you can't really bike there. When I'm going through this spot, it is when I'm going from over here, like after crossing through there, going down there on this big circuitous route just because I can't use Eglinton. And then this is the rough patch between here and over here where things get easy again. On my way to the this awesome path here, which like it would be a pretty excellent trip all the way to the Don Valley, except for a few rough patches along the way, and this is really one of them. So this is another mystery. Who knows? It may become good, but don't hold your breath. There's all these drivers, pretty much all of the cyclists that I used to know have given up and switched to driving, and they're waiting, they're chomping at the bit for all these places to become usable. So places like this where they need 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 lanes for drivers, 7 lanes in order to accommodate like basically 4 lanes or 2 lanes or 3 lanes worth of drivers. And there's no place for cyclists, but the Eglinton Crosstown promises us a bike path, but I don't really believe them, so it's a maybe. So we got 3 maybes here along this area, spanning a pretty good ways. So all through here and all through here, if you want to go east-west, you got to wait for a questionable future. And then, yeah. So that's Black Creek Drive. We'll see what happens with that. So let's look at this other rail line here. To cross it, you got to use either Weston or Church or King or Lawrence, or is there some weird spot there? Yeah, there is. It's a weird spot there. Denison, Jane, let's see, Ray Avenue, of course, right, Eglinton, Black Creek Drive itself, right, Rogers right there. Let's see, the next spot would be St. Clair and, oh yeah, the surface crossing there. And just to go a little bit further outside the ward, we got where DuPont turns into Annette. So, let's get funky with this rotten peach. Where are we at here? Weston. What are we even looking at? Oh yeah, this rail line. Right. So, I mean, I guess I should say there's also the potential future Humber Trail, which might go through there. So we'll start with that. It might go through there, as in, like there's where the Humber Trail goes underneath the highway. And we marked that in orange before, because it's like, okay, I can use that to cross. But it's like, if I'm just trying to visit, you know, Best Buy or something from my home over here, I just want to be able to use Weston to do it. I don't want to go down into the valley in some spot and then climb all the way back up out of it just to go to Best Buy, when the drivers can just go. So that might become a thing at some point for like longer distance commutes where your destination and where you're coming from are both kind of near the Humber Trail. A spot like this, that could be great, you know, and hopefully it happens one way or the other. But this project, there's these different options, right? For fixing the gap in the Humber Trail, because right now you go along the Humber Trail, you have to climb up out of it, which is like that's a pretty decent climb. Go along Weston, which sucks, and then go back down into the valley or the other way around. And so for people who are using the Humber Trail, this would be the best choice. That'd be great because then you could just stay in the valley. For people who are trying to use Weston, they're all hoping that this gets to be the spot that is christened as the solution to this gap. But if you're using the valley, that would be so annoying. Climb out and back in. So it's so annoying that a project like this is only going to happen because they're trying to fill this gap in what's currently a really kick-ass, spot. It sucks that they're either going to have to take land away from the golf course, which is hard, or away from the rail company, which is hard, or take driving space away from Western Road drivers, which is hard. But I mean, as a commuter, that's the one that I would choose because Weston is the viable commuting route. But right now, this is what Weston is like. So, yeah, the cycling occurs entirely on the sidewalk. There's like enough space to bike past a pedestrian safely, comfortably, but of course, you're breaking the law. The people who are like not willing to break the law, they're all driving. Because as a driver, you have the luxury of being able to obey the law. You don't have to obey the law when you're passing a cyclist. Most drivers do, but, most isn't good enough. It still means any commute on a bike where you're using roads like this, you're getting your right of way dangerously, terrifyingly, and deliberately violated like once every 5 minutes, once every 2 minutes, once every 10 minutes, depending on the type of road. Roads like this, it's like once every 2 minutes. So, I mean, I want to be able to commute on my bike forever, no problems. I'm not willing to go to the hospital. As a driver, when you're going through some sketchy spot on the road, when you got to like turn left in some awful spot, you're locked in. You don't have a choice. That's one of the things I hate about driving. As a cyclist, I can just get off the road, wait for it to become okay, and then use it. So in a lot of ways, cycling is safer. It has the potential to be safer, but not when you got to use roads like this. So there you go. For crossing this rail line, that's not viable. This might become viable and crappy at some point in the future. If you're trying to use surface routes, it's just kind of stupid to have to go down into the valley and up out of the valley just to like get from there to there. So let's see, what is the next spot? Oh yeah, church. What is church like? I keep forgetting. I think on church, it's one of these spots where like every time I do it, I'm kind of either surprised at how easy and trouble-free it is, or I'm surprised at how crazy somebody is about passing me in a spot where they could easily just hang back for like a couple seconds and not pass me super fast. So as a regular commute, like I'd do this. That's not so bad. It's a Church Street. It's definitely in orange. I should make two different colors of orange, one for like easy and one for a little bit harder. But let's just say orange is possible. It's not so bad, but it's not like hassle-free no problems. You can do it quickly. It's always going to be safe. You can do it with any bicycle. You can do it with any skill level. Orange is like, fine, I'll do it. So it has the potential to work for some of today's drivers, some of today's transit users, but it's not as easy as driving across it. It's like definitely not as easy to bike across here as it is to, drive across here because of the crazy stuff that some drivers do, even in a place like this where like there's no reason to fail to yield to a cyclist in this spot. Well, yeah, it's a recreational facility. That's hilarious. Just because this other spot is so close, let's check it out at the same time. This place, oh, here you can see it before the construction. Here you can see it after the construction. This is a nice ramp. I mean, I'm going to actually label that in green. I think this is the first of all of these crossing spots that I'm marking in green. That's really bad. Because the thing is, like, I'm making this area sound terrible because it is for commutes where you actually go somewhere. But it's got so much potential because between all these terrible places, there's all these roads where cycling is great. And it's just green, 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 green the whole way. Like, this is cycling paradise. You can bike super fast here, safely. The drivers are totally cool. And this is generally what the whole ward looks like, except when you're on the major roads, and except when you're having to cross over all the infrastructure barriers that get between all the places that are like this. Here's that spot. Here's a similar place over here. Totally easy, hassle-free, super fast, safe cycling. So that's the thing, like, that's the potential. I mean, currently, almost any bike commute through this area is going to be 90% that. And so most of your trip is awesome. And then you got to deal with this for like very little of the distance of your commute, but it's just such a big deal because it's so sketchy and terrible. Like, Lawrence. So didn't they say Lawrence? Yeah. Wouldn't it be so cool if Lawrence actually got blessed with something usable? I mean, there's no mention of it on this map. It's not an actual cycling project. And who knows whether even, like, this is the latest stuff on the official City of Toronto website, but they're so non-committal about stuff until it actually does get built. I mean, even when it does get built, it gets taken out a surprising amount of the time. So I don't even know if this is still the city's plan, these 3 maps that I'm checking out. This is just the best I can tell. I mean, I would hope that somebody from the City of Toronto Cycling Group or Traffic Services or whatever is going to watch this and review it and comment on like anything that I got right, anything that I got wrong, and whatever. And they would pretty much have to do that in order to give people an idea of what's happening in this ward, because so far we don't have any other answer. We don't really have a, roadmap to, of what's going to be happening. And the official plan for all the cycling routes is we'll put something in, we'll see what happens with the cyclist situation, and then we'll think about putting something else in. So in our ward, and that's like very open to sabotage because let's say if the plan is to do almost nothing, then transportation services people, if they have a bad attitude that they're keeping secret, they can just pick some cycling project which they know is not going to be popular, do it as the next thing, and then say, look, hey, that was never popular. We don't have to do anything else. There's no demand. And maybe that was the plan with Scarlet Road. Like, let's just take a little detour here, to use a pun. Scarlet Road, great cycling facility, and it doesn't get that much use. How could that possibly happen? It's so good. But the facility goes from like here to there. So it links you with the Humber River Trail, which is not really a good commuting path. It's really slow going on a bicycle because it's full of pedestrians, and like it should be. It's a good, it's a good recreational route for cycling. And it's not even a good recreational route for cyclists, let's be honest, because it's so narrow and there's so many pedestrians. And the pedestrians, they sort of act like how you act when you want to discourage people from being there. Like they'll spread out over the path and pretend not to notice that somebody's cycling up. And yeah, it's not really a great route. So it almost gets close to what should be a good commuting route along Eglinton, but even the Eglinton path is not that great of a commuting route because like it does connect with these communities here. So for people who live around here, it should be good enough to get them to like major employment centers like the airport and stuff. But no, because as soon as you get past around here, this whole area, except for on Sundays when there's not that much traffic, it's like it's lung cancer because there's so much pollution from these highways. So it actually makes your lungs hurt to bike along here and like use it as a way to get to the airport. Once you get near the airport is surrounded by a moat of anti-cycling infrastructure. So you can get close to the airport on a bike, but there's no way to get to the airport on a bike. You might as well just take the bus like from right outside of it to the inside of it if you're working there. And this is a place where like thousands of people work every day. And many of those people live in our ward. And they end up taking the bus there and back or driving there and back. And they're going to continue to because trying to do it on a bike sucks. Like this Eglinton path, it has the potential to connect the airport area and this whole neighborhood and this whole neighborhood and this whole neighborhood and our neighborhood all together, but it doesn't. Not unless you have like an oxygen supply, and a gas mask. What the Eglinton path is useful for, and of course, you can't take it through Eglinton Flats because it doesn't go through Eglinton Flats because this plan for connecting it up here never happened. And I don't think it's going to happen. You can't really use it to get into this neighborhood because doing Emmett on a bike with the drivers is sketchy as hell. They could put an awesome commuting route through here, but this is just a service road for like the golf course and stuff. I don't think this is ever going to be a viable commuting route. It could be great, but I don't think it's ever going to be great. There's no plan. So right now, the Eglinton path here is basically good for connecting this whole neighborhood and the Humber Trail, which is not that great of a cycling facility. So there you go. And the Scarlet Road bike lane is great for connecting our neighborhood, as in just this neighborhood here, with the Humber Trail, which is not that great of a cycling facility. And if you can use the Humber Trail to connect from this road to this neighborhood. So it does help in connecting this neighborhood to this whole neighborhood over here. But that's not really enough, use to get it used that often. Trying to get to the Scarlet Road from this whole area is frickin' impossible because Dundas West is a no-fly zone. I mean, a no-bike zone. So it's got limited potential. I think that limited potential was pretty foreseeable. So the angry conspiracy theorist in me wants to say they put in this really expensive and awesome cycling facility on Scarlet in order to avoid ever having to put anything on Weston or even on Eglinton because it hasn't gotten enough use. So that kind of sabotage may be going on behind the scenes. I don't know. I mean, probably not, but the problem is that incremental approach just sucks. It leads to all these commutes that are incomplete and drivers driving next to awesome cycling facilities that they still can't switch to because, I mean, they're driving through here and as soon as they get there, they're like, yeah, I can't switch to doing this on a bike because I'm going to the junction on Dundas. Or, I'm going to Babby Point. And there's no way to bike through here. In the future, there might be. We'll see. It's unknown. Anyway, tangent completed. What was Denison like for crossing these tracks? I mean, I should really just do those tangents as part of some other video, but they are totally related. So Denison, it's one of these places like Ray Road where there's deliberately no cycling facilities. It's just barely difficult to bike through here safely. It's just barely one of the rough patches on an otherwise good everyday cycling commute. If you do it enough, you're going to end up in the hospital, but, you got to have like expensive tires to do it. But, it's on the difficult side of the orange spectrum. It's doable. Jane, not so much. I mean, just for entertainment purposes, this is what we're expected to bike on. And this is why, like, cyclists don't get in trouble for being on the sidewalk, because, like, no cop is going to be like, how come you're not cycling here? Yeah, because I don't want to have to scrape you off the sidewalk. So let's see, I'm part of the local cycling committee for this area that the councilor made a while ago to help her figure out her cycling and pedestrian strategy. And part of my job was identify major corridors and ask for cycling infrastructure to be put along them. And the city basically did say, yeah, we'll think about it. But of course, it never, Jane Street north of here might be considered in the future for a major route, but nah. Jane and Weston are basically going to be uncyclable forever. And the councilor herself has confirmed this, and that's really disappointing. So that's in red. Always will be. Ray, Ray is it's just like these other spots where it's sketchy, it's doable, not for everyone, could be better, but the drivers aren't crazy enough to make this a red zone. They're just barely crazy enough to make this a orange zone. So that's nice. Eglinton sucks, but it might not suck in the future, so that's black. Black Creek Drive. again, we'll see what happens with it. Right now it sucks. Oh, and I didn't review this. Now, right at the beginning of the process that the Pedestrian Safety and Cyclist Committee went through, I stood up and made this impassioned speech like, unless we deal with these type of places. And that's what this video is about, all these type of places. But I was using Rogers Road as my example. Unless we deal with places like this, we're not really going to make an impact. When we made our report to council, we didn't deal with the places like this. The bridges and tunnels, the crossings of all these major infrastructure barriers, we did not deal with. And in that respect, we failed. And the city itself has also failed. And that's why I'm making this video, to just prove like these are the places that really matter. Unless we fix these places, no, we can't say that cycling is a thing here. No plan for Rogers Road in this stretch here. I don't even know if I can read it in this one. Oh yeah, right. They've got some weird plan to put this aforementioned rail path here, but that doesn't touch where it crosses the tracks. Where is... yeah, so that would be like right there is the spot I'm talking about. So, I don't know. That one's either like red or in black, neither of which is a good sign. And then there's St. Clair, which is, pretty much the same. St. Clair, there's like 3 different plans from the city to maybe do something about this whole Stockyards area. And it's really hard to find out what the plan is. But this place right now, it's so crappy. It's just like, it's so difficult to deal with. I don't know where St. Clair is here. Maybe it's there? So, is that a future? No, that's local cycling network. So what the hell is that? Where's St. Clair? Oh yeah, that's St. Clair. No plan on this map. No plan on this map. I don't think that there is this one Stockyards project thing. So let's color that in black as in maybe it might happen in the future. The city is so mysterious and non-committal about that spot that we'll see what happens. This is currently the best place to cross this, and I'd say charitably, this is going to be an orange. I've seen cyclists like fall off their bike here. I've had drivers like do crazy stuff to me as I'm coming through here. When I use this spot, I usually wait right here for like a surprisingly long amount of time for the drivers to cruise through here, and half of them are like, come on, man, just go. They'll like stop here and be like, just go. Because I never know who's going to give me trouble when I'm trying to cross through here. I don't know if they know that I'm going to be coming up here and then like slowly crossing like this so I don't have to fall off these tracks, and then kind of waiting for them and then coming back on here. And I don't know. It's dumb. In, I think recommendation 16 of our like former Ward 11 cycling and pedestrian report to council, I proposed this as like a spot where we should offer cyclist improvements. But I was just like, I don't know what to suggest here. But could the city please come up with some way to make this easier? So that's like, and they said, yeah, maybe. And, in the future, yeah, maybe. So there you go. And then down here at, the next spot, it's one of these places that like, oh God, it sucks going through here. Right in this spot here, cyclists end up getting jostled by drivers, and it it's so annoying if this is part of your everyday commute, because it's one of those spots where you know at some point you're going to the hospital. Same thing coming the other way. I mean, you can see it's not really, every time I go through here, I'm like, yeah, no, I hate this place. It's very sketchy. So, but there is basically a bike lane there, so that's a charitable yellow. It's practically in red for me. The way I think of it, I'm like, no, I want to avoid that spot. I use this spot. But, it is there. So let's review. On this rail line, just to make it a little more clear, I'm going to switch to the... No, what am I going to switch to? Yeah, okay. So trying to cross this spot, we got like only one place in the whole ward have I marked any of these crossing zones as being good. And it's a crossing zone where you got to walk up a ramp or bike up a ramp, bike across, back down a ramp. It turns the distance into 10 times what it actually is just to accommodate a rail line. So it sucks, but it's very safe. So it's in green. Everywhere else, it's there's a few places to cross over this. On the southern end, throughout this whole section through here, there's no good place to cross unless the city gets creative on us in the future and surprises us with some good stuff. You have to go all the way south to this sketchy surface crossing I just mentioned, or get into the junction and go into that tunnel, or go north to here. And then even if you make it to there, if you're going further east or west, there's all this maybe in the future it might work. You got to go super far north. So yeah, you can see why this is a major barrier. All right, we're halfway through the video here. I'm getting emotionally, this takes a toll on me because this has been so frustrating. It's been years of trying to map my way through this area, trying to, brainstorm with the other people in this pedestrian safety and cycling committee, trying to get answers out of the city, doing more homework, trying to get answers out of the counselor and her staff, trying to convince them to do stuff that they don't really feel like they have the political will to do. And of course, all the time, actually physically using these places myself. And going on Facebook and seeing other people expressing frustration at trying to get through these spots, asking, is there any plan for these places? Why is it so hard? And why does the city hate me? Why do they want me to die? And why do they want me to drive so badly? Why do they need me to drive? Well, I mean, going into conspiracy theory mode again, driving is a major part of our economy. I don't think that the car industry and the oil industry, I don't think they're willing to let driving be optional in Toronto. I think they have significant power over our politicians. And over brainstorming brainwashing the public. So I think Toronto is pretty important to the auto and energy industry, and I don't think they're willing to allow driving to be optional here. And I think they would have to become willing in order for it to happen. So here's the best place to cross this rail line. This is part of anybody from this ward. If they're going downtown, they're probably going to end up crossing over here after crossing that other spot that I demonstrated where I saw cyclists falling over. And the thing is, if you notice, there's a place where you can bike all the way through here and save 5-10 minutes. You could bike through there. You could bike across there if it connected up. I don't know. But I mean, expecting the rail companies to make space for cyclists when the city itself, who has full control over the roads, is not willing to make space for cyclists. Like, no, that's not really fair. Anyway, so this crossing on Osler, that's pretty decent. Like, that's almost a green. We'll put it in yellow. Almost a green. Not so much over here on Kiel. Kiel, like, completely sucks. And I just wish that Kiel, like, it starts out as Parkside Drive, right over here. It continues as Kiel. It becomes Weston. Goes all through our ward. It goes up into the next ward. If we could have bike lanes all along here, that would be so great. But the counselor says no. She's like, no, it's just too important for drivers. Well, the thing is, it's important for drivers for the same reason that it's important to cyclists, because you have to use it. We can't pretend that we're downtown in some place where there's all these awesome side streets and all these awesome tunnels where you can go through just on our bikes. These places like this, we actually have to use them on bicycles. Right now, they're in the red. And I don't think there's any plan to change that. No, that's Kiel. Let's see. No plan to change any of that. So this is always going to be an impossible crossing. Sorry. Runnymede, we already checked it out. I mean, I'm going to put it in orange. It's almost a green, but the thing is, getting to it is not super easy. This whole area here kind of sucks to go through. This whole area here kind of sucks to go through. You know what? I'll put that in green, because by contrast, compared to everything else, that's pretty good. But, you know, it's not that great. Jane, same thing as Kiel, and there's no plan to make it good ever. So, yeah, it's in red. It's always going to be in red. God, that spot sucks. This, honestly, it's not so bad. I cross through this spot all the time, and, like, it's really not so bad. And at some point, it's going to get a bike lane. When it gets a bike lane, it'll be awesome. It's going to make the Scarlet Road bike lanes way more useful. I guess they're waiting for this whole area to become renovated before they declare Scarlet Road to be a failure and give up on putting in anything else anywhere else in this ward. Even though that whole plan makes no logical sense, that's their whole thing. It makes logical sense in some places. Kind of, they're like, okay, we'll do this place over here and we'll see if it brings more cycling to the surrounding areas. And then every 2 years, we'll reevaluate what we're going to do next. The problem with that is this whole transitional period, space is getting taken away from drivers. It's getting turned over to cyclists. The drivers still can't switch to that space because there's all these places along their commuting route where it still hasn't been civilized yet. Cyclists can't really use it as much as they should be able to because there's still all these rough patches, so we're still using side streets instead of all these lanes that they spend so much money on. So, and the whole thing just means, like, basically until the global warming situation is so bad that we're constantly having so much crazy storms and life as we know it is gone, and life is just so unpleasant that everybody's like, no, I'm done. I'm not having kids. It's basically going to take that long for them to get their act together. So what I would want is just make everything easy to bike on so that driving is optional. do it in like 3 years across the whole city, and let us get on with our lives. But I mean, I don't know, that would make too much sense, honestly. It's, like that's the best. That's my suggestion: is abruptly do it all over the place instead of this approach of incrementalism. Because this incremental approach means this action is going to stay the same for like at least a decade, which is really depressing. So we're almost done here. So for the southern barrier, there's a few places. There's like this, well, basically just one place that's good to cross, another place that's like it's doable, but as soon as you get onto Dundas, it just sucks. So, I mean, I should be labeling that in red, but whatever. Dundas is just ridiculous. So, the southern boundary is pretty bad too. There's no real plan to fix that. I mean, I keep hearing these vague ideas about how Dundas at some point is going to get a bike lane, but like, I don't think so. Do they have some plan for Dundas that we don't know about? I mean, they're not making it look like it. Of course, every single year, it's like a wait and see. It's like, well, we'll make it so that it's just barely possible to bike there, and then see if people do bike there. And then if a whole bunch of people do bike there, we'll try. It's like they're always sort of like pretending that they got to start from scratch to figure out the transportation network for cyclists when the transportation network has already been figured out. It's already here. It's called the arterials, the arterial bloody roads. Folks, it's the same roads. And that's what everybody's in denial about in terms of wards like this is like, well, we just need to give cyclists good places for cycling and just put in bike facilities in places where it's going to be feasible, in places where it's not going to upset the drivers too much. But all the places where we actually need cyclist access are the same places that are important for drivers. Because long ago, this neighborhood was designed to necessitate the use of the major arterials. And like I said before, they are also barriers, but going into all the crossings there and stuff like that is like, that's a huge task. I'm not going to do that. Suffice it to say, basically any commutes through these places, like if we absolutely do not want to put any cycling infrastructure on any of these major roads, then we got to address, like, even if we never want to do that, the side streets would still basically work as long as all of these things on the map, because now we've basically done it, except for, I guess I'll still do the Humber River one. But basically all of these have got to be like either orange or green before cycling is going to be possible throughout this ward. Whether we get anything on any of these arterial roads or not. Without anything on the arterial roads, it's like inconvenient but possible to bike throughout the ward, into it, out of it, inside of it, as long as all these black spots end up turning into orange or green spots, as long as the red spots get turned into orange or green spots, and as long as most of these orange spots get turned into green spots. And as you can see, that's like hasn't happened and is probably not going to happen. So before I say cyclists don't move here and don't expect anything if you do, I'll just do the one last thing here and review all the crossings of the Humber. So the Humber Trail, this is like a little bit more difficult. Some of them, there's like bridges and stuff. So obviously, the highway not happening, the rail line not happening. Where can you even cross over? Oh man. So definitely St. Philip's. Where are all the bridges? I think I know where all the bridges are. Next place is Lawrence. It's like this one spot here, I guess. Eglinton, of course. Scarlet, of course. There's one spot where there's a bridge there, but like, how do you actually navigate that? There's no way to get. Oh, there are a few ways to get out of here. So I guess I'm going to evaluate the crossings like this based on how easy it is to get to them from the neighborhood streets on either side. All right, that's the plan. Dundas. Oh yeah, and by that time you're out of the ward. This type of work, I find this kind of thing pretty interesting. It's like, it's interesting enough that I'm just barely willing to do it, enough to try and promote, changes being done and try and figure out how I can get around on a bike. I just turned into a bike commuter because I found driving to just be so frustrating, and the dangers involved are impossible to mitigate. Like, I just hate them. They're nerve-wracking. And I also just hated owning a car that's so annoying. There's like, you have to have a good mechanic, and you have to have a good tire place, and you have to have a good brake person. You have to have like all these professionals who all have to be really good and really honest. And I had that up until a certain point, and I was like happy with my car, and it was all good. And then I ran out of good people, and my driving situation just sucked. And I was like, I'm done. All right, so St. Philip's, I don't want to bike through this. That sucks. See if there's any plan for this spot. Yeah, this is kind of hard to. This map is like not easy to read. Okay, so it's south of the highway. Let's say this might become good at some point, but it sucks right now. Lawrence. Just see if there's anywhere. No, there's no bridges. Let's see, Lawrence for crossing over. Yeah, completely sucks. Maybe Lawrence might be fixed at some point. Probably not. We'll see. Depends on how many of you are willing to go out and bike around randomly for commutes that don't really work and risk going to the hospital all the time for the city to put something in that works. That's not fair. Drivers didn't have to do that in order to get the roads paved. Cyclists shouldn't have to do that kind of stuff in order to get, decent cyclist access. So for this area, I know it's pretty easy to get to that spot. It's pretty easy to bike over through here, and it's pretty easy to get through here. So I'm going to say this is a go. This is green. Even though in the winter it kind of sucks. In the winter it just sucks too much. That's basically orange. Next spot is Eglinton. one of the few places where you can cross the Humber River with no problem at all, because this is my favorite piece of cycling infrastructure in the whole city. Except, yeah, in the winter. They still haven't maintained it. But I had a pretty easy time going across that every time I tried it last winter. So let's just pretend that that's good and green. Even though it only takes you to Eglinton Flats, which is basically a no cycling zone. But I mean, it's got potential. A big, awesome thing that finally happened here on Scarlet is they finally put in the curb cut so that you can get from the Scarlet bike lanes to the Humber path, which is awesome. And of course, because of those bike lanes, this finally went from being red to being green. Incredible. Very important bit of progress. Huge thanks to the councillor and to Transportation Services for making that happen, because it rules. Let's see. Oh yeah, this crossing here. Okay, so you can get to this path from this neighborhood. You can go through this. There's like a few paths that go through here. It's like, so for crossing the Humber River, I'm gonna say this is like orange. Also, because this bridge sucks, you have to like walk your bike along it. And there's not enough space to walk your bike along it when you're passing some pedestrians or some other cyclist. It sucks. And here on Dundas, this spot is so annoying because there's space for good, for like cycling space, but it's always full of debris. It only goes up to there. This whole area is a huge barrier. As soon as you get here, the rest of this is a huge barrier. So like, if you're taking a side street to get to here, there's such a small amount of traffic on Dundas and so many lanes that all you have to do is wait for it to be clear. And it's clear long enough to basically get to or from the bike lane. And then going through here, this really is the problem. It's not so much there that's the problem. It's this whole area that's the problem. And it's doable. You just have to keep pulling over and waiting for the drivers to clear, and then you can get on the road, but then you get stuck at the stoplight. And then the drivers show up again. So it's just this kind of dumb spot. So I don't know. I'll label it in orange because it's got potential, but it sucks. And that's the end of our ward. So finally, I'm done. I'm done demonstrating why people don't use their bikes to commute through this ward, because you got to cross through all these things to get anywhere, and because you got to use one of these spots to do it. And I mean, try and picture yourself connecting the dots through this. That's not really going to happen. So hopefully all these spots that are in black right now, as in they might get fixed at some point in the future, hopefully all those spots get fixed and turn into green patches. Because those red spots, there is no plan to fix them. So we actually have to get all of these projects that are proposed or maybe being considered or whatever to turn out really well. And if they don't, just don't move here unless you want to drive or unless you want to take crazy amounts of time on transit. Remember, I was looking through those routes. It's like 25-minute drive, 20-minute bike ride, 40-minute bus trip. It really sucks. So I don't know how else to conclude this video except to say we have failed as the Pedestrian Safety and Cycling Committee have failed to turn what was Ward 11 and was the western half of what's currently Ward 5 into a place where people can use their bikes to get around. And the pedestrian situation, as you can see, still sucks and is probably going to continue to be terrible in the foreseeable future. So we've also failed in doing anything to try to make the situation better in what is currently the eastern part of Ward 5 and used to be Ward 12, because it's bounded by, these barriers. And our group has not really made any effort to do an update on a new report, bringing our asks for what was previously Ward 11 into what is currently Ward 5, expanding it into the rest of Ward 5, and dealing with all the stuff that we didn't deal with in our report, which is, most of these trouble spots were not listed in our report. We overlooked the most important thing. And the other most important thing, which is the arterial roads, all we did was we said, we need to be able to use these on our bikes. We didn't really prove why we needed to use them. But in this video, I sort of do prove why. We need the arterial roads to be able to get from here to here, or from here to here. So it's we need either all of the arterial roads to be fixed, or we need all of these spots to be fixed. And I mean, cycling is great in this spot because, look at how green it is. And look how many people live here and work here. Our buses are totally full. Transit users are pretty disappointed at how long it takes to get through these spots. And drivers are disappointed at having to drive all these commutes that they can see perfectly well would be great bike rides. They're disappointed at having to drive them and then having to drive to the gym to get all the exercise that they could be getting while they're commuting. So they're like, okay, great. I'm spending 20 minutes driving somewhere that would take 25 minutes cycling. But if I could just do it on a bike, I'd be spending 50 minutes a day getting 50 minutes a day of exercise instead of spending 40 minutes a day driving. And then, driving was twice as fast. So let's say I'm spending half an hour a day driving. I could be spending an hour a day cycling, but getting an hour a day of exercise. And I need to be getting an hour a day of exercise anyway. So right now, my commute plus my exercise is an hour and a half. And my commute plus my exercise, as in including my exercise, could be an hour. So I could switch to cycling, save myself a half hour a day, save myself hundreds of dollars a month, and have a nice time doing it, and not have to drive, which is nerve-wracking. So the drivers are not happy with this situation either. Anyway, there you go. There's the cycling situation in Ward 5. Really, there's the driving and commuting in general situation in Ward 5. This is why I really hope it changes. And as you can see by all these black spots, this is why I really don't think it's going to.